Well, good evening, everybody. It's Adrian Bridge once again joining you from Taylor's Port here, in fact, in the gardens of Taylor's visitor centres, where I have around us a number of people who have come to see our cellars. They're open, and people are coming here to discover, to learn about port, and indeed to taste port. But I've also just come down from the Douro, where I have been today talking with David Gimreins, who's our head winemaker, and meeting with other members of the team, because we've been in harvest now for about 2 weeks. This has been a year that started way back in March before coronavirus, with bud burst happening a couple of weeks earlier than usual. So bud burst started for us on the 3rd of March. That's when the vine sort of burst into life. And we've essentially been 2 weeks ahead of time all season. So harvest started in the beginning of the 3rd week of August, which is much earlier than usual, and we started to bring in grapes to make rosé ports, and also to make white ports. And of course, one of the reasons we bring in and start with the white ports fairly early is because, unlike a normal port grape, which takes about 3.5 days from picking to the moment of fortification, with the whites and indeed with the rosés, what we need to do is to have a longer period of time. We actually do a chilled fermentation. We drop the temperature down. That slows down the activities of the yeast, slows down the fermentation, and gives us a little bit more time to extract the delicate flavors, make sure that we have these nice colors, can keep the freshness that we always look for in a white port, particularly in a dry white port, whether in fact we're having it on its own when we can taste it, or indeed whether we're mixing it as a cocktail. Very important to get that lovely freshness into the wine at the beginning. And so harvest has started, and started well. It's been a challenge. I would anyone who's been up there recently or has plans to go, what I think you'll find is that the Douro itself is very hot. We had a heat wave last week with temperatures of 39 degrees. And what does that mean? Well, effectively, the ripening of the grapes in that heat will just accelerate, and that brings up more sugar, and it tends to change the acidity balance in the berries themselves. And so, and in addition to that, actually what happens is you lose a little bit of volume. So what happens is all of the farmers that supply us all want to immediately pick all of their crop. They want to get it straight into the wineries as soon as possible, because each day it's left on the vine perhaps means that the bunches themselves will shrink. And obviously from our own position, we want to get as many grapes in as possible, because at this stage of the year, as hot temperatures will continue the evolution of the berry itself, it doesn't improve the flavors. You lose a bit of the acidity, and so we are also challenged to try to make port as quickly as possible. So things are busy, but things are, I think, in fairly good conditions, given that we are in this totally new coronavirus world that we're all having to live and adapt in. And I was interested to see today the new Lagars with the mechanical pistons, which we have installed in Quinta de Fagelas. Those are now working extremely well. I think many of our workers up there were concerned that they weren't going to be able to tread, but we had to explain to them that because of the physical distancing necessary, treading this year isn't going to happen. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see that the new technology installed there is working incredibly well. Of course, we've had these mechanical pistons at Quinta de Rueda and Quinta de Terra Feita for a number of years. So David and his team is well practiced in the use of this equipment to make the very best ports. But obviously this year it is our only source of making ports in Lagars, because we're not doing foot treading. I hope, of course, that next year we will be in conditions to be able to return to that foot treading, and I'm sure that we're going to learn a number of interesting lessons this year from having to do the purely mechanical approach to the harvest. One of the other things that I can sort of tell you is that seeing the grapes coming in, and I saw a number of white grapes coming into Quinta de Rueda today. They're coming in with fairly thick skins, which of course is always very important for creating quite a lot of colour, but it creates things with a little bit more tan and a little bit more structure. So it's interesting to see those coming in, and they're coming in at a sweeter level. So I think probably from now on, we'll probably be using those white grapes only to make the sweet white port as opposed to the dry white port. One of the beauties of Chip Dry, which was launched and created by Dick Yateman back in 1934, is that it is dry and it has this lovely freshness to it. Of course, Taylor's also makes a normal white port, which is a little bit sweeter and is popular in a number of markets. But the Chip Dry is perhaps something that we are most well known for, partly because many people will have fond memories of a glass of Chip Dry sitting out on a terrace overlooking the Douro Valley with perhaps some salted almonds, maybe a few olives, and generally relaxing in a wonderful way with a glass of the Chip Dry wine. Of course, many make it into a cocktail. What I've done here is a little different to what we normally have. By habit, we've typically tended to use mint, which I think brings out a different set of flavors in the Chip Dry. It tends to make it a very fresh drink. Here, in fact, what I've opted to do is to put a little bit of the orange peel in, and that creates another zestiness and richness to it. So this is a very fine and very refreshing aperitif. And I know that in these hotter conditions, many people would prefer to have a longer drink, which of course, by definition of being about 1/3 Chip Dry and about 2/3 tonic water, probably has an alcoholic strength around about 7 or 8 degrees alcohol by volume. So it's a little bit lighter as a beverage, and of course chilled as well is extremely refreshing. And whether you're using mint or indeed a twist of orange, or indeed a slice of lemon, this offers a fantastically refreshing aperitif before a meal. So this is what the dry white ports are all about, and this is something that we're increasingly seeing in demand around the world, with lots of people learning and discovering this style of port. And I find that very encouraging, because what I'm seeing in many markets around the world in this process of lockdown is that port sales are actually increasing. I don't know whether it's because port typically, more typically perhaps than as an aperitif, comes at the end of a meal where people are relaxed and they're looking for something that's got the richness, the sweetness, the fullness, and it's just some wonderful way to finish off a meal when you're sitting with family, perhaps chatting and looking for that lovely way to finish off a meal. The port sales around the world have continued to do well in this difficult time, and I think that talks to the resilience of this as a beverage, and indeed the flexibility. As you can see here, I've chosen 2 completely different ways to enjoy the Taylor's Chip Dry, both of which are delicious. So at this moment in time, the business is certainly challenged by a tricky harvest where we are having to do things a little bit differently. But I would say that after 328 years of tried and tested approaches to making port in the Douro, I think the team is well adapted to handle such new challenges. And certainly I'm encouraged by everything that I was able to see today, and many of the made ports that were made last week or right through to this weekend have shown lovely freshness and structure and good tannins because of those thicker skins coming in the hot conditions. So overall, we're going to remember 2020 for many things, and one of those is that we've had to take a different approach to doing our harvest, and that at the beginning of the harvest we've certainly been able to make some fine port. We will now watch to see how things develop. On Sunday and Monday of next week there is a certain amount of rain program, so that's on the 13th and 14th of September. There's a little bit of rain that is programmed for the Douro Valley. We shall see what that does. At this stage it's probably too late for the berries themselves, but it might just give a sort of wash off the dust and put us into slightly cooler conditions to finish off the harvest. I fully expect at Quinta de Vargelas that we will finish harvest around the 18th of September, so it'll be finishing at a time when often that particular property is starting. That is the nature of the year. That's what we're here doing. At the very heart of our business we're farmers, but then we're farmers that perhaps at the end of the day are lucky enough to pull the cork on one of our products, to pour a glass of it, to raise it to you, the listeners. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. Cheers and good luck.